Hey everybody, welcome back. Part 8 of our study on the American Dream, Great Gatsby. This is actually the last video that's going to focus on the novel. We have 2 more that are coming about different ideas of the American Dream from different perspectives. So this skips ahead, and I know this hasn't been a traditional teaching of the Great Gatsby like I would do in the classroom, simply because I don't know who has a copy of the text. And I don't know who can listen to the YouTube audiobooks. So this is more just focused on the idea of the American Dream through the supplemental materials and my relaying what happened to you in the novel. So we're going to skip ahead because that's where the meat of things are. And basically this is what's happened to this point. Gatsby is trying to get Daisy to leave Tom. Daisy kind of wants her cake and eat it too. She doesn't want to leave Tom. She's afraid. Gatsby doesn't understand. And it's not so much, all on Daisy because, she's made a life with Tom. And she has a daughter. And Gatsby's so single-minded, he doesn't care. And they have a big scene, an altercation where Tom and Gatsby have it out. And this other stuff happens, and I'm not going to go into it. It's a big, huge twist with the character of Myrtle. But we're going to skip on past all that, and Gatsby is left alone in his love of Daisy. And Daisy goes back to Tom, and then eventually Gatsby is killed. Oh, shocker, yeah. He's killed, and we're not going to get into exactly how it happened, but, he was killed, and he ends the book, the title character dies. But what I want to do is I want to read you some passages out of this, and then we're going to move on to our supplemental material, which is actually a poem about 2 goldfish. Now, you may be thinking, what in the world do 2 goldfish, a poem about 2 goldfish, have to do with Great Gatsby? But again, it's not necessarily about the goldfish. The goldfish are a metaphor. All right, so there's several things I want to talk to you about today, and this lesson is going to be a little longer. Excuse me, a little longer than normal, simply because there's several parts that I want to talk about related to the novel. All right, first thing I want to do is I want to talk about Tom and Daisy, and there's an excerpt on page 144 and 145. They kind of go to what I'm talking about, so I'm going to read it. Nick goes and he's sort of looking in for Gatsby because Gatsby is standing outside of Daisy's house at night trying to protect over her, and but Daisy has moved on. Tom has won, and Gatsby doesn't realize this, and so Nick says, okay, I'll go and check on her to make sure that everything's all right. And so Nick walks in, and this is what he sees. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He was talking intently across the table at her, and in his earnestness his hand fell upon and covered her own. Once in a while she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the air, and yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture. This is one simple part of the book, but I love it because Daisy and Tom, first of all, Tom is a horrible person, all right? He's a racist. He's a misogynist. He openly cheats on his wife. She knows about it. He doesn't care. He's arrogant. He looks down upon people that he thinks are lesser than him. He's just a bad all-around person. However, at this point, he realizes that he has almost lost his wife. And he doesn't want to lose his wife because he does love his wife. Horrible people are still capable of love. We have this. Remember back in one of the earlier lessons we talked about psychopaths and sociopaths and the cheater's high and good people doing bad things. Tom is he's not a good person, but he's still capable of love, and he realizes that he's hurt his wife. He realizes he's hurt his wife greatly, and so now. This part right here where it says, there was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture. This is marriage. This is a husband and a wife who've had a really, really rough time. and they've had a huge blowout, and they've been cheating on one another, and both of them probably, think that the other one doesn't love them anymore, especially the way Tom treats Daisy. There's no reason for her not to think that, and it drove her into the arms of another person, an old flame, and now they're trying to reconcile. They're trying to reconcile, and that's what a marriage is supposed to be. I mean, not necessarily the being cruel to one another, no. But when you have disagreements and you have arguments, a good marriage is supposed to be having a natural air of intimacy and sitting down and talking out your problems and realizing that you are human. And just because you've gone astray and just because you've each hurt each other, a successful marriage is having this natural air of intimacy and sitting down together and working out your problems. And that's what Tom and Daisy have. And earlier in the novel, a few pages before this, when Tom and Gatsby are fighting, Gatsby says, she's going to leave you, she's coming to me, yada, yada, yada. And Tom says, there's things between me and Daisy that you can never understand. And it's true. Everybody looks in and they look at Tom. He's horrible, and Gatsby. But he's telling the truth. They've been married. They have a child together. There are things between Daisy and Tom that Gatsby cannot understand, and this is coming through here. And I love that line because as bad as Tom is, he's trying to work to save his marriage. Now, what's going to happen with Tom? Is he probably going to go back and do his old ways? Probably. But we don't know that because that's not what the author talked about. So at this moment, he is realizing the error of ways and he's trying to save his marriage. And that is what you're supposed to do. Half of all marriages end in divorce. 50% of people who get married end in divorce. So if you're watching this and you got a friend and there's two of you, statistics say that when y'all get married later in life, if you get married, one of you is going to end in divorce, and that's sad. That's sad. So let's move on here to another line. Right on down from that. How is Gatsby taking all this? Okay, well, just straight on down from where I just read at the very bottom, the end of chapter 7. Nick doesn't tell Gatsby what he saw because Nick knows that Gatsby has lost, and he thinks it would just crush him even more. And so Gatsby won't leave. He says, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to protect Daisy, because he doesn't realize what's going on. And then it says, he put his hands in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly to his scrutiny of the house, as though my presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. This is without a doubt my favorite novel. And every time I get to one of these lines, whenever I teach this book, I say, well, this is my favorite line. This really is one of my favorites, simply because it's so understated. And if you don't really necessarily pick it up at first when you read it. But in this one sentence, Nick basically says that everything Gatsby has worked for, every single bit of it, is failed. It's failed. And it says, so I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. In other words, he's there to protect the one he loves, but she's not even thinking about him anymore. Or she may be thinking about him, but she's moved on. And Gatsby almost takes on this pathetic persona now, and Nick sees that. And this goes to the idea of what I'm getting around to about the American dream. Gatsby has worked so hard and built himself up, focused on what he wants. This one thing he wants. Not money, not fame, not power, but the love of his life. And it's just crushed. It's just gone. Crushed and gone. And that's the idea of the American dream. You have this notion of, in America, you can be anything. And it's true. It's possible. Yes. You can rise up from the lowest of lows and become anything. But the thing about it is just because you work hard, and just because you're smarter, and just because you're stronger, and just because you do more than the other person, that does not mean you are still going to succeed. And that is what it is. And that's the part that's lost. So many people just, they say, oh, I can do anything. And then when they hit the least bit of failure, it's over with. It's gone. And that's what separates the people who rise above to the people who fall below. Separating the wheat from the strong from the weak is that those people who go on and succeed and do awesome things in life, when they're working and they hit those setbacks, they don't let those setbacks keep them down. And this goes to what I was talking about yesterday, about Invictus, the poem Invictus, and I was talking about Rocky Balboa, and I was talking about all of this stuff. It all goes into this idea of the American dream you can achieve, but you have to fight for it. And just because you work hard doesn't mean you're going to succeed. Gatsby did all of it. He didn't succeed. All right. We're going to go over here. Now, in the next chapter, Nick goes to Gatsby's house and he stays with him because Nick is really the only friend Gatsby has. This is it. Just this random stranger that he met and he was trying to use basically to get close to Daisy. This is the only friend that Gatsby has. And in this chapter, Gatsby tells Nick the truth about who he is and how he worked hard. And Nick is just astounded about how hopeful Gatsby is. How hopeful. And this is the point of Gatsby. The reason why the book is called The Great Gatsby is because Gatsby is so hopeful. And he's been beat down. And he's not going to give up. And of course, it's sad he ends up getting killed. But if Gatsby had not got killed, I like the idea of an alternative type history of Gatsby. If I was more creative and I was still banging out fiction stories like I did in my youth, I would like to write an alternative history of Gatsby, like where Gatsby realizes that Daisy's not worth it and what he's been fighting for is not worth it, and he goes on and he moves out west and he and Nick become buddies and they get into some other kind of adventure or whatever. I love that because Nick realizes here in this chapter that he's just so impressed with how hopeful Gatsby is, and he realizes his friend's not going to give up, and then he ends up getting killed. All right. And then it goes here on page 151, and Nick is thinking to himself, and he's thinking about basically how shallow Daisy is and how Daisy really doesn't deserve Gatsby. And it says that Daisy wanted what she wanted now, and she didn't understand why Gatsby had to leave. He went to leave to fight in World War I, and she doesn't understand that. And so she doesn't want to sit around, and she's spoiled, and she goes back to seeing a bunch of different guys, and then eventually she marries Tom. All right, Nick doesn't have a very high opinion of his cousin. All right, let's see. And then right here's Nick's probably most famous line. This is the last word he ever spoke to last thing he ever told Gatsby. He's telling Gatsby before he leaves because he's not going to see Gatsby again. Gatsby gets killed a few pages later, but Nick doesn't know that. And so he tells Gatsby, "They're a rotten crowd. I shot it across the lawn. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together." Because Nick comes to this realization that everything that he has thought, this book, even though the book is called The Great Gatsby, Nick is the main character. And it's really about Nick's journey. Nick is a farm boy. He's from the Middle West, and he comes to New York, and everything is bright lights and big city, and he's in love with it. And it chronicles his transition over the course of a summer and how he comes to realize that all these people, yes, they're rich, and yes, they party, and yes, they have fun, but they live these hollow shells of lives, and nothing they do accomplishes anything. It's just pitiful. And Nick, in that one line, he says, basically, he sums it all up. Gatsby, you're the only good person I've met here. And Gatsby's not walking on water. Gatsby has a lot of faults as well. But he realizes of all the bad people I see, you're the least bad. All right? let's see. I'm going to move on here. And this here is the last thing I'm going to read, and then we're going to move on to our story about the goldfish. So Gatsby gets killed, and nobody shows up. Nobody wants to come to the funeral. Nobody wants to come. Wolfsheim, who is Gatsby's business partner, the criminal, he won't come. Daisy won't come. Daisy won't take calls. They leave. It says not even a flower from Daisy. All of this is Daisy's doing. All right, and she's just gone. All right, he calls it. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it says like they went back into their world of money and parties, and they were happy to be rid of my provincial squeamishness forever. Provincial means small, peasant. If you've watched Beauty and the Beast, Belle sings a song, My Provincial Life. In other words, Nick is saying that he is small and weak and one of the lesser people to Daisy and Tom. And so they're tired. They're ready to be done with him. They don't care the destruction that they've wrought. They don't care that Myrtle is dead. Spoilers. They don't care that Wilson is dead. Spoilers. And they don't care that Gatsby is dead. All they care about is their money and, oh well, who cares? So Gatsby's daddy shows up, and Gatsby's daddy is the only one that's there with Nick when Gatsby gets buried. And it goes on, and the part here that's good about this, the reason why Fitzgerald, the author, Fitzgerald included this part with Gatsby's father, is because it comes in and he gives a list, and he talks about how hard my son worked. And he's so impressed and so proud of his son. Because this guy is extremely poor. This is what Gatsby referred to as Nick referred to as shiftlessness. How Gatsby considered himself a son of God. That's what Gatsby didn't consider himself to be the product of his parents, because his parents didn't have the goals. He doesn't talk bad about his parents. He just says, it's implied that Gatsby thought that he could achieve so much more. All right? And his daddy comes in, and his daddy's so proud, and he has like this little book that Gatsby would read, and he had a little schedule written in it. Gatsby did, and this is when Gatsby was a boy. And it talks here where Gatsby had this schedule of things he was going to do every day. He's going to wake up at a certain time. He's going to exercise. He's going to study. He's going to go to work. Then he's going to make himself better. And then right here, general resolves. I like this right here. General resolves. These are just basically overall things he wants to do. No wasting time at Shafters, which is basically probably like a little club. No more smoking or chewing. Bathe every other day. And you may be thinking, bathe every other day, that's nasty. Well, this is in the 1910s and stuff in Iowa or Idaho or wherever. They probably didn't even have indoor plumbing. So taking a bath was a problem. Save $5 crossed out. $3 per week. Read one improving magazine or book per week. Be better to parents. Gatsby had this idea at a very young age of it wasn't probably even a thought process of I'm going to do this to be better. It's just that people who work hard and they have this built into them, it comes early. And this is what it is. This is Fitzgerald showing you that what separated people like Gatsby from others, even Tom, because Tom was born rich. Tom's daddy was rich. Tom's granddaddy was rich. He didn't have to work for his money. Daisy the same way. Gatsby had to make himself. He had to build himself up. And it's showing you right here that working hard from an early age, that was what was instilled into him by himself. So nobody shows up to Gatsby's funeral. Yeah, okay. All right, so that's the last part I'm going to read for that. Now, I'm going to read the last page when we get to our final lesson on the American Dream, because, again, it has one of those awesome lines in it. All right, so I talked about Gatsby's hard work, talked about how Daisy was weak and selfish, but we also talked about how Daisy and Tom, they had this natural air of intimacy about one another, and they realized that their marriage was on the rocks. And they said that we don't want our marriage to end. Now, they didn't say that to one another. It's not like, Daisy and Tom went up to one another and said at the same time, we don't want our marriage to end, let's work things out. Jinx, buy me a Coke. It's not like that's how it happened. Okay? But they're married, and successful marriages, when you have down times, when you have bad times, Doesn't matter how much you think you dislike or even hate the other person in the moment. Those marriages that succeed, as opposed to those marriages that fail, are the ones where the people realize that this is worth fighting for. And that's what Daisy and Tom have. Nick is the only friend that Gatsby has. He realizes, though, that what he thought was awesome is not. And he ends up going back home. He leaves New York. He goes back home because he doesn't like the fakeness and the artificiality of the town. Again, we talked about the idea of the American dream. And just because you work hard and just because you do all of these things doesn't mean you're going to succeed, period. Work as hard as you can and still fail. And that's what happened to Gatsby. And then, nobody was there for Gatsby when he died. And that just goes to show you how so many people are. There were hundreds of people at every one of his parties drinking his booze, eating his food, and they cared nothing about him. They were like an entourage almost, kind of. There's this happens to a lot of professional athletes. A lot of them will be poor kids, and all of a sudden they have millions of dollars. And people, when you get rich, people come out of the woodwork. People who win the lottery, all of a sudden people come out of the woodwork. And you've never seen Cousin Jethro. You didn't even know you had Cousin Jethro, but Cousin Jethro shows up and, hey, can you give me $50? But it's probably more than that. At the NFL, they actually have something called a rookie symposium. And rookies come in and they teach them. The NFL teaches them. They set it up through actors and have psychiatrists and everything. And they teach them how to deal with having money if you've never had it. Because these guys become multimillionaires overnight at 22 years of age. And as you get older, you get more perspective. But give a lot of 22-year-olds, multi-million dollars, and they're going to make bad decisions. And there's an ESPN 30 for 30 called Broke. And it follows a lot of professional athletes who were multi-millionaires. And now, 5-6 years later, they're bankrupt because they don't know how to manage their money. Because they were taken advantage of by the people, kind of like the people who took advantage of Gatsby. In life, people have this idea of being liked and wanting to be part of a group and having a bunch of friends. And there's nothing wrong with that. One of the basic human needs is to feel like you belong. That's just part of being a human. But the true thing is that what Nick has learned and what Fitzgerald is writing here about the people who took advantage of Gatsby and what these professional athletes learn by these people who come in and want their stuff is that there's no point in having dozens and dozens of friends. You can have acquaintances, but in life, if you can have one, maybe two really close friends that when you need them, they'll be there, that's saying something. And me personally, I really don't even think I have that other than my wife. I have acquaintances and I have people I consider good friends, but I don't know if I have somebody who, no matter what the circumstance is, I have cats fighting behind me. I apologize. I don't even know that if I could call everybody at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, I'm in the bad part of town, broke down, will you come get me? I don't know of anybody who I would do that for. It's just the way it is. So that's what Nick realizes here, and he feels sorry for Gatsby, but he's still amazed at how hopeful Gatsby was. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go over our story, our poem about the goldfish who fall in love. And you're going to be thinking again, how do we relate two goldfish who fall in love to the Great Gatsby? We will. Okay. Poem about two goldfish relates to the character of Jay Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan. All right, so here, Love Song with Two Goldfish by Grace Chua. Grace Chua is an award-winning journalist whose work usually deals with science and the environment. In this poem, Chua explores the love between goldfish living in a fishbowl. Okay, I'm going to read it first, then we're going to go over it, and then we're going to go over the answers. If you do not have access to the Webster Parish portal, or if you were not a student from Webster Parish, or if you just want to, have this to read, because I know everybody wants to read about goldfish and love, then go to commonlit.org right there, search for this, and you can open it up and download it, and you can participate. But again, if you're a Webster Parish student and you're in the English 3 section, this is already there for you. Hopefully you have accessed it and you already answered it. You're just trying to get verification. So let's go. He's a drifter, always floating around her, has nowhere else to go. He wishes she would sing. Not much, just the scales, or take some notice. Give him the fisheye. Now, this is something called blank verse. Blank verse is poetry that does not rhyme. Okay? Poetry that does not rhyme. And you may be thinking, well, what's the difference between blank verse and just regular, prose writing? Well, to me, I'm not a big fan of poetry, but it's kind of similar. But there are things that make blank verse poetry different. Bounded by round walls, she makes fish eyes and kissy lips at him, darts behind pebbles, swallows his charm hooks, line and sinker. He's bowled over. He would take her to the ocean. They could count the waves. There in the submarine silence, they would share their deepest secrets, dive for pearls like stars. But her love since gone belly up. His heart sinks like a fish. He drinks like a stone, drowns those sorrows, stares emptily through the glass. The reason she said she wanted, and he could not give, a life beyond the bowl. All right, so here's a very simple short poem. It's not it's not about goldfish. It's about young men and women falling in love with one another and drifting apart because one cannot give the other one what they want. All right, so up here, this first stanza, the guy starts noticing the woman and he starts making advances on her. She sees him and kind of flirts with him because he's the only other goldfish. There's no other goldfish. And think about this, y'all. I was talking to my wife just the other day. When you're like in a small town social circle, especially like high school, in a small high school, you have all these thoughts and you have all these dreams and you'll see this person and you'll love them and you think that's the love of your life. One, it's your biology and all that, but we're not going to get into it. And two, you have a very small selection of people to choose from. Most people do not marry their high school sweethearts, and if they do, I don't know the statistics, but I'm saying that it probably doesn't end well, or maybe it does. I don't know. Point is that you have this idea of, oh, I'm in love, but the circle is small, and here the fish, that's it. They're just together, nobody else, and so she's interested in him, but then, she starts to wise up and sees that, she can do better, maybe. I don't know, goldfish. Anyway, let's keep going. I'm going to talk more about the metaphor here for the goldfish for young men and women. He's bowled over. He would take her to the ocean. They could count the waves. All right, take her to the ocean. This is like him talking about, oh, we're going to do everything, and I'm going to show you the world together. All this, flowery talk that happens in the early stages of a relationship, especially a young relationship with young people. But our love's since gone belly up. His heart sinks like a fish. He drinks like a stone, drowns those sorrows, stares emptily through the glass. Now, this part right here, this is not that big of a metaphor. I mean, this is simple, period. To me, this is basically, she doesn't love him anymore, or the infatuation is over with. He gets depressed. He starts drinking and not taking care of himself, drowning his sorrows. And I like this line right here, stares emptily through the glass. Now, it's a metaphor saying, hey, the fish looks through the fishbowl, but it also means the guy's looking through his glass that has his alcohol in it, and he's ruminating, and he's upset, and he's mad, and he feels like his heart is broken. The reason she said she wanted and he could not give a life beyond the bowl. Now, how does this relate to Jay Gatsby? Okay. Daisy could not get what she wanted out of Gatsby. She couldn't get it. Gatsby wanted more. Daisy just wanted to play around. Gatsby wanted more. Gatsby wanted Daisy to leave Tom, and Daisy knew she wasn't going to leave Tom for a variety of reasons. I'm going to think good of Daisy, and I'm not going to say anything bad about her, and I'm going to say the main reason is because she has a life with Tom, she has a child with Tom, and she doesn't want to abandon that. Okay? Gatsby is
would be crushed if he weren't killed. But he is crushed here in this beginning. But can you imagine how Gatsby would have been if Daisy had just been like, no, just no. He would have been unbelievably crushed. He would have been like this poor boy fish in the fish bowl. All right. And so here, this is just it's just steps in a relationship between young people. The goldfish are just metaphors. Isolation is something that everybody goes through at a young age and even older age, and your desire to want to explore the world, and you have all these feelings, and there's this person, and they talk about a life together, and lots of times you just drift apart. One of my favorite songs is a Bruce Springsteen song called "The River," and it could be this goldfish story just with actual people, and it talks about in this song that these high school sweethearts, and they're in love, and on the 18th he accidentally gets her pregnant, and they get married real early, and they talk about how we're going to have all this love, but then as years go on they kind of drift apart, and they're together but they're not really happy, and etc. And this is the cautionary tale for young people about, think logically, and that's really hard to think logically when your heart is telling you something. And you don't want to end up like the goldfish here. You don't want to end up like Gatsby, crushed. You don't want to end up like the guy and the girl in the Bruce Springsteen song. All right, so let's move on down here to our questions. Where'd I find my questions? All right, here we go. Number 1. Let me get to it. Come on now. It's going slow. All right, number 1. I'm sorry. Hold on. It's got a mind of its own. All right, which statement identifies the central theme of the text? Now, this is part A, part B questions. And if you haven't taken the LEAP test yet, or you are going to take a LEAP test, you got these part A, part B questions on it. Part A, which statement identifies the central theme of the text? The answer is B. Love is difficult to sustain and often fades. That's depressing. We are raised on this idea of love at first sight and happily ever after, but those are just stories. Those aren't real. You go through, even the strongest of relationships go through moments like Daisy and Tom, where they're sitting around a plate of cold fried chicken, and they're not eating the fried chicken, and they're just talking, and they have this natural air of intimacy. Happily ever after does not exist. Even if you have a success and you have love, you're going to have these rough times. All right, part B. Which detail from the text best supports the answer to part A? The answer is C. But her love's since gone belly up. His heart sinks like a fish. All right, question 3 is a part A, part B. How does the structure of the poem contribute to its meaning? The answer is B. The first 3 stanzas depict the growing love between the 2 fish, while the last 2 stanzas show why their love falls apart. The story of men and women, or just people in general who love one another and then fall out of love. All right, part B, which 2 quotes from the text best supports the answers? This one's asking you to pick 2 quotes to back up what you say. This is even more difficult because it's a part A, part B, but then it's asking you for 2 things to back up what you think. All right, the answer is C and F. Darts behind pebbles, swallows his charms, hook, line, and sinker, and he could not give a life beyond the bowl. All right, down here, the discussion question. How does the poet's use of puns or words with multiple interpretations contribute to the poem's meaning? I think it just goes to show you it's trying to relate this really human issue. It's like a personification type thing. It's trying to relate this extremely human issue and trying to put some humor in it as well, saying that, humans go through this, fish go through this. It's just tough life. It also has humorous parts in here, puns where it says like he drank like a fish, etc. Reference to the male's tendency in love songs to drown their sorrows. All right, drown their sorrows. We talked about it. Staring through the glass. How does the poet's use of parentheses develop the poem's themes? Well, if you notice in parentheses and in the brackets, it's kind of like one is from one's perspective, and then the next stanza is from is from the other fish's perspective, the man and the woman, and then it also has people parentheses and brackets to kind of like, I think, to establish a stronger sense of isolation, and because parentheses means you're pausing, you're taking something out, you don't need it, it's isolating it. All right, down here, these are your own opinion questions. I can't answer them for you. In the context of the poem, what does it mean to feel alone? How can two people experience isolation despite living in the same house and being in the same relationship? That's deep right there. If you've ever heard it, I know y'all are young and you probably haven't ever heard it, but you heard of this term, if you have, of a loveless marriage. It's basically a marriage of convenience. You may have started off in love, but the longer you're together, you drift apart and you just stay for, maybe you have kids, maybe you have financial obligations. You become more like roommates than you do actual husband and wife. 2, the title of this poem is Love Song with Two Goldfish. How is this love story between the fish similar to a love song in the context of this poem? How are we changed by love? Love really at its core is just chemical reactions in the brain. That's all it is. That's what it is. But if you've heard especially old country love songs, this could be a country love song. It really could be. It talks about boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl, girl falls in love with boy, and then they drift apart. That's what it is. How are we changed by love? Infatuation, to love, to isolation, to loneliness. It's depressing. It's depressing.
So that's our last lesson on The Great Gatsby itself. I am going to read a couple of more lines from it on our last day to kind of tie everything up. As we have talked, this has been a much longer video than I normally make because I wanted to cover a lot of stuff here in the tragic tale of Jay Gatsby. The part that I want to leave you with here is this, is that especially my students, because I love teaching The Great Gatsby and I make it fun and enjoyable and they love it as well. Invariably, every junior class that I teach it to, they want to have their prom centered around The Great Gatsby, a Gatsby theme, and that was actually going to be the theme of this year's prom, but coronavirus. Everybody has this idea of Gatsby fun and parties, etc. That's not what the book is about at all. The book is about one man's dream, working hard for it, coming up against harsh people and failing miserably. It's about what are you going to do when life really hits you hard. That's what the book is about. It's a book of hope. It's a book of depression. It's a book of humanity. It has nothing to do with parties and glamour. The main character, Nick, he comes to the realization that parties and the glamour and what everybody thinks of The Great Gatsby, the novel, and the movies that have come, when they think of it, they think parties and happiness and all. The book talks bad about that. The book shines a light on the frailty of humanity and how this life these people lead is meaningless. And again, I'm glad that the people like The Great Gatsby. My students like it when I teach it, but it always frustrates me. And of course, they are teenagers. Yes, I get it. But it always frustrates me because so rarely does anybody see what I'm trying to teach them and what the book is trying to teach them. That all of this fanciness and all this that glitters gold is really just not. It's like the Tim McGraw song, Where the Green Grass Grows. All of this that glitters gold is fading dark. There's bars on the windows and bars on my heart, pouring concrete in the city park. A life of simplicity is better, and that's what Nick realizes. So, take anything away from The Great Gatsby, the movie, the book, anything you've heard me teach. If you are a student, a graduate who I've already taught this book to, please realize that it's not about parties and fancy dresses and cool clothes. It's about how bad people are and how good people can run ashore and be crushed by those bad people However, that doesn't mean you stay down. Keep fighting like Jay Gatsby. All right, come back tomorrow, and we're going to have a video and a lesson on the poetry of Langston Hughes. It's actually very good. You'll enjoy it, I promise. See y'all later. It's a great day to be a warrior.